The rain had started as a thin, irritating drizzle, the kind that seeps into your collar and makes everything feel heavier than it should. Arav pulled his jacket tighter as he hurried along the sidewalk, his shoes already damp, his mind racing through the familiar calculation of minutes. 7 minutes late, maybe 8. He pictured his daughter Mira's sleepy face from that morning, the way she'd clung to his leg when he told her he had to rush. "Don't be late again, Papa," she'd whispered, not as a complaint, but as a worried plea, as if his lateness was something fragile that might break them both. He worked hard to be on time. Harder than most people knew. Being a single dad meant mornings were a battlefield of packed lunches, missing socks, homework crises, and daycare drop-offs that never aligned with bus schedules. Still, his manager didn't care about reasons. She cared about clocks. The company cared about clocks. Arav knew that painfully well. He was almost at the office entrance when he heard a sharp gasp behind him, followed by the unmistakable sound of a body hitting concrete. He stopped without thinking and turned around. Near the subway steps, a woman was hunched over, one hand braced against the railing, the other pressed tightly to her swollen belly. Her face was pale, rain streaking down her cheeks like tears she hadn't had time to cry. "Are you okay?" Arav asked, already moving toward her. She tried to answer, but the words tangled somewhere between pain and panic. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if Arav hadn't caught her arm. Up close, he could see how young she looked despite the exhaustion in her eyes, how carefully dressed she was, as if she'd forced herself into composure that morning and lost it all at once. I think something's wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm pregnant. I was just trying to get to work." Arav glanced at his phone. 9 minutes late now. His chest tightened, that familiar knot of fear and frustration pulling at him. He knew exactly what would happen if he walked in late again. He also knew he couldn't just leave her there. Not like this. "It's okay," he said softly, lowering her onto the steps so she wouldn't slip. He shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders, shielding her from the rain. "I'm calling an ambulance." While the phone rang, he spoke to her in a calm, steady voice, asking her name, telling her to breathe slowly, assuring her help was coming. She clutched his sleeve as another wave of pain hit, her fingers surprisingly strong. Arav stayed with her, ignoring the rain soaking through his shirt, ignoring the passing commuters who glanced and hurried on. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics moved quickly, asking questions, lifting her onto a stretcher. She looked at Arav as they wheeled her away, fear still in her eyes but something else too, relief, maybe gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible over the siren beginning to wail. "You didn't have to stay." Arav forced a small smile. "Yes, I did." By the time he reached the office, his clothes were wet, his hair plastered to his forehead, and his heart still pounding. He slipped into the building, hoping, foolishly, that maybe this time, someone would understand. But as soon as he stepped into his department, his manager looked up sharply. "You're late," she said, tapping her watch. No concern, no curiosity, just irritation. "I know," Arav replied, swallowing hard. "I stopped to help a pregnant woman." She collapsed. She cut him off with a raised hand. "I don't need excuses, Arav. This is the 3rd time this month." "They weren't excuses," he said quietly. "They were emergencies." Her expression didn't change. She opened a drawer, pulled out an envelope, and slid it across the desk. "HR has already processed it. You're terminated. Effective immediately." The word hit him harder than he expected, like a sudden drop from solid ground. Terminated. He thought of Mira, of rent, of school fees, of the promise he'd made to be more stable, more reliable, after her mother passed away. "I stayed because someone needed help," he said, his voice trembling despite his effort to control it. "And now you're free to help anyone you want," his manager replied coldly. "Security will escort you out." As he packed his desk, slipping Mira's photo into his pocket, Arav couldn't stop replaying the woman's face in his mind. The fear, the relief. He didn't regret stopping, not for a second, but as he stepped back into the rain, jobless and soaked to the bone, he wondered how kindness had become such a punishable thing in a world that needed it so badly. The first night after being fired, Arav barely slept. The apartment was quiet in that heavy, uncomfortable way that makes every thought sound louder. Mira was curled up under her blanket, breathing softly, unaware that her world had just shifted again. Arav lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the manager's voice, the slap of the envelope on the desk, the way security had avoided his eyes as they walked him out. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. He just felt tired. Tired in his bones, in his heart. The next morning, he put on his calmest smile and made breakfast like always. Mira chatted about school, about a drawing she wanted to show her teacher, about how her friend's mother was pregnant too. Arav listened, nodding, hiding the knot in his chest. After dropping her off, he went home and updated his resume, sent out applications, and pretended not to calculate how long his savings would last. 3 days later, his phone rang. An unknown number. For a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. Then he answered, "Mr. Malhotra, this is Chai Group Corporate. We need you to come in today." Arav's heart jumped. "About what?" "There's been a review of your termination," the woman said evenly. "Please come to the main office at noon." The main office. Not his department. His hands shook slightly as he ended the call. He changed into his only good shirt, the one he'd worn to Mira's school events, and took the bus across town, his mind racing through possibilities. Best case. Severance. Worst case. Nothing. The boardroom was larger than any room he'd ever been invited into. Polished table. Floor-to-ceiling windows. People in tailored suits speaking in low, serious tones. Arav felt painfully out of place as he stood near the door, waiting. Then the door on the far side opened. The woman who walked in moved with calm authority, her posture straight, her expression composed. Arav recognized her instantly, even without the pain and panic from that rainy morning. Her pregnancy was still visible, though now she looked radiant rather than fragile. She met his eyes, and for a brief second, surprise flickered across her face. "This is the man," she said to the room, her voice steady and clear. The one who stopped. She turned to Arav and smiled. "Mr. Malhotra, I'm Anaya Chai, founder and owner of this company." The room fell silent. Arav felt the floor tilt beneath him. I didn't know," he managed. "That's exactly why this matters," Anaya replied. She gestured for him to sit, then addressed the executives around the table. 3 days ago, I collapsed outside our building. This man gave up his time, his job security, and his comfort to help me. He stayed. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't check my badge. He acted like a human being. She picked up a familiar envelope from the table, the same kind Arav had been handed. This termination was approved without context, without investigation, without values. She tore it in half. A murmur rippled through the room. Effective immediately, Anaya continued, "Mr. Malhotra is reinstated, not to his old position." She looked at Arav again, warmth in her eyes. "You deserve better than a job that punishes compassion." She offered him a new role, one that came with flexibility, security, and authority. A role that allowed him to be present for his daughter without fear. Arav could barely speak as he accepted, his throat tight, his vision blurring. Before he left, Anaya stopped him. "One more thing," she said gently. "Because of you, we're changing our policies. Emergencies will be treated as emergencies. Humanity will no longer be optional here." That evening, Arav picked Mira up early. They walked home together under a clear sky, his hand warm around hers. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something he had to survive. It felt like something he could finally trust.